On primetime politics tonight, as some politicians pose for pictures with the protesters in Ottawa, the Prime Minister calls on all parties to condemn the ongoing protests and rules out sending in the military. As protest organizers dig in, the protesters argue they're fighting for the freedoms of all Canadians. David Coletto's here with some new polling information on how Canadians see the protests and the responses from our political leaders. Manitoba MP Candice Bergen begins her new job as interim leader of the Conservative Party. Party President Rob Batherson will be here to discuss the process for replacing Erin O'Toole and the challenges for the new leader of the party. And our panel of party commentators on the political fallout from the protests and the upheaval in the Conservative Party. And let's begin tonight with the latest on the ongoing protests in Ottawa, with truckers and supporters occupying city streets for a seventh day to demand an end of vaccine mandates and other pandemic health orders right across the country. A core of around 250 protesters has made many parts of the downtown core impossible now. Stores have closed, horns honk day and night. Some residents say they've been threatened and harassed. Police have made a few arrests and laid mostly minor charges against some of the protesters, but the trucks and other vehicles, they haven't moved. And now protesters have started building wooden structures in a downtown park not far from Parliament Hill, lending an air of permanency to their plans to stay. Some Conservative politicians from Saskatchewan, including former leader Andrew Scheer and Senator Denise Batters, posed for pictures to demonstrate their support for the protests. The Mayor of Ottawa called that display an absolute disgrace. Today, the Prime Minister ruled out sending in the military and called on politicians on all sides to condemn the protests.
People of Ottawa deserve to have their lives back, and this is a time for responsible leadership as well, for all politicians from all parties to tell these protesters, as I have, that it's time to get back to normal in the city of Ottawa, that people of Ottawa who are just trying to live their lives and who are suffering through this pandemic like everyone is across this country, it's time to give them their neighborhoods back.
In another development, the House of Commons Public Safety Committee has decided to call officials from GoFundMe to explain where the $10 million collected for the trucker convoy has been raised and where it could be going. GoFundMe's frozen the account now while it does a compliance review. Some of the organizers of the ongoing protests in Ottawa met briefly with the media today to defend their actions and warn they have no plans to leave.
We are therefore calling on all levels of government in Canada to end all COVID mandates and restrictions. We will continue our protest until we see a clear plan for their elimination.
Well, the protesters claim they are standing firm to defend the freedoms and rights of all Canadians. But do Canadians share their views? And what about the response from our political leaders? How are Canadians feeling about that? David Coletto is the CEO of Abacus Data and a frequent contributor to Primetime Politics. He's with me again this evening. David, good to see you. Thanks for being here. Look, let's start. Before we get into all the numbers, tell me about this latest survey. What do we need to know about it?
We completed this survey from January 31st to yesterday morning. Interviewing 1,410 Canadians, representative of the Canadian population by age, gender, region, official language and educational attainment. It's the same methodology we always use, and it's as frequent or as close a snapshot as we can get to how Canadians are feeling about what's going on in Ottawa and other parts of the country.
Oh, look, everyone's frustrated with the pandemic. That's how Canadians are feeling, and the restrictions and the mandates. But the protesters say they're clogging streets in this city, honking horns and all the rest, and planning to move to other cities in Canada this weekend to what they say is preserve the rights of all Canadians. Do they have a receptive audience for their views and their actions?
Well, in our survey, a majority, 2/3 of Canadians say they have little in common and don't share the views of the protesters. So, if you use that metric, no. Most people would say, I don't agree with them. I don't see myself. I don't identify with these protests. And that's the view across the country, and it's pretty consistent in every part of the country. But there is a third, 1 out of 3 Canadians who say in our survey, I do share some things and the views of these protests, and that's not insignificant a size of people, right? 1 out of 3 is millions of Canadians who, at least in a small way, see some agreement, some connection with what's going on here where I am in Ottawa, and you, Peter, and in other parts of the country.
And when you look at that, I mean, you've broken it down in terms of the parties they support. If we can go back to that graphic for a second, what stands out for you about some of those numbers when you look at party breakdown?
Well, I think there's the expected numbers are, Liberal, NDP, Bloc Québécois supporters overwhelmingly say, I don't agree with much of what I'm seeing from these protests. I don't connect. I don't identify with them. On the other hand, it's expected that those who voted for the People's Party, who really championed this in the last election, almost all of them say they do connect and agree or see common ground with those folks. The Green Party, I will say, we see a majority in our survey who say they see common ground or they have a lot in common. Small sample size, and I wouldn't make too much of that, but I do think there's an element of sort of this anti-vaccination, anti-mandate coming out of the Green Party. But the interesting one is the Conservatives, right? When you look at those who voted Conservative in 2021, almost half say they see a connection with those that are protesting, and about a similar number say they don't. And so for a party that has kind of come out as really in some ways, some of the members of that party have been not only cheerleaders, but supporters of those that are out protesting in Ottawa. They don't have the full support of their base. And I think that probably reflects some of the divisions in that Conservative caucus itself.
You also asked about the views of Canadians on the protests, and I guess some of the tactics and so on. What did you ask, and what did you find?
So we asked whether people felt that what they had seen or heard about these protests was appropriate and respectful, or was it, in their view, offensive and disrespectful. And again, we find a clear majority, 57% of Canadians think what they've seen and heard about this is not very good, is offensive and inappropriate, but 43% feel that it's been okay, that what they've seen has been peaceful and respectful and appropriate. Again, the same kind of breakouts by party and by region. As you might expect, Conservatives more likely to think that these protests have been respectful than those who might have voted Liberal, NDP, or Bloc, and the People's Party overwhelmingly feel everything's okay. So again, little tighter margins, but still the majority of the country saying, I'm not happy with what I'm seeing on display.
Right. Look, we've seen different reactions from political leaders, some dismissive of the protesters and their cause, and others supporting them or urging them on, taking pictures with them in some cases. How has the public viewed the response from our political leaders?
Well, I think the best way to sum it up is none of the three leaders we tested anyways, do you find lots of Canadians saying, great job, guys. In fact, in most cases, a majority or so are saying, I think they've made really poor choices, or they've made inappropriate choices. They haven't acted appropriately. And that's true of the Prime Minister. It's true of Mr. O'Toole, who at the time that the survey was done was the leader of the Conservative Party, and Mr. Singh, who has less negatives, but still there's a sizable group. And it really depends on where you fall on that first question, right? If you are somebody who sees common ground with this protest, you're much more likely to think Mr. Trudeau and Mr. Singh have been have made bad choices. If you are somebody who thinks that this protest is bad and you have seen no value in it, then you're more likely to see Mr. O'Toole as kind of making bad choices. But there's also this group, which I think is really interesting, that says to us, look, we understand this is a really challenging moment. And there's a sizable number who say, look, they're not doing well, but they're doing as well as possible. And so there's mixed views out there, but really none of the political leaders are really winning kudos for how they've handled this. And I think it's frankly partly because how difficult this issue is.
All right. So what's the upshot in these numbers? What do you take away from them? What's the message here for politicians?
Well, we're coming on, not quite a week, but almost a week of this protest in Ottawa. There's talk of these spreading to other parts of the country. The vast majority of Canadians look at this and say, you've had your chance. You've said your piece, time to go. They don't connect. They don't identify with what's going on. But we also can't forget that there is a sizable group. It's not a fringe. Like 1 out of 3 Canadians is as many people that voted for the Liberal Party in the last federal election. And they see themselves to some extent in what's going on. And I think as a reflection of just the sheer frustration and impatience people are feeling about this pandemic and just wanting it to be over. And it's now turning into outright protest and quite a number of people who are cheering these folks on.
All right, David Coletto, CEO of Abacus Data. Always good to get your perspective, David. Thanks for talking to us. We'll talk again.
Thanks, Peter. Take care.
Well, let's turn now to the latest on the turmoil inside the Conservative Party of Canada. One day after a majority of the caucus voted to dump Erin O'Toole as leader, Manitoba MP Candice Bergen made her debut as the interim leader today in the House of Commons. Bergen was chosen by caucus last night to lead the party until a permanent leader can be chosen to replace Erin O'Toole. When will that happen? What are some of the big challenges facing a new leader for this party, and why are the Conservatives going through this process yet again? Rob Batherson is the president of the Conservative Party of Canada, and he joins me now. Mr. Batherson, good to see you. Thanks for taking time to speak with me.
Hi, Peter. Happy to be here.
Look, what's your review of why Erin O'Toole lost his job?
You know, really being president of National Council, it's not my place to handicap leadership dynamics. The reality is the Conservative Party of Canada, with Erin O'Toole's support, we give the right to our members of parliament. The members of parliament give themselves the right to vote on leadership, and enthusiastically embracing democracy, they decided the leader's fate. They have that right. We respect the outcome, and now as a party, we move on to putting in place the foundation for a new leadership vote.
And I want to get to that in just a moment, but you know, as the party president, you talk to a lot of people. You have lots to say about in terms of conversations you have about the direction of the party and what's needed to keep the party, vital and important to Canadians. In his parting comments, Erin O'Toole said, quote, "This country needs a Conservative Party that's both an intellectual force and a governing force. Ideology without power is vanity. Seeking power with ideology is hubris." Look, a lot of Conservatives are looking at that message today, and some see it as a need to reinvent the party and what it stands for it. Some others look at it and say, look, this is, that Erin O'Toole deceived Conservatives by promising to uphold their core ideas and then sacrifice them after that. So what do you see here as, in those parting comments in terms of what do you think is needed to in terms of selecting a direction for the Conservative Party?
Well, I think that's going to be a question that as the leadership race gets running, that leadership candidates themselves will be articulating, will be questioned by our members, and that's going to be an important point of discussion along with others. The reality is we are starting as a party from a very strong foundation. We've won the popular vote in the last two elections. We have 119 seats in the House of Commons representing 9 provinces. We've paid off our election loan. So there's a very strong foundation there. What we have to do, though, is, under the next leader, build on that foundation so that more Canadians vote Conservative. Obviously, we've gone through 3 straight elections and 3 different leaders where not enough Canadians have felt comfortable voting Conservative and electing a Conservative government, and that's going to be a major challenge for our next leader.
Right. Would you agree that that's what Erin O'Toole said he was trying to do? He was trying to, the way elections work in this country is you can win the popular vote and still not win an election, as you know, because you need to win at the riding level. And he says that's what he was trying to do to grow the party with these messages. Is that what you saw from him?
I think the reality is now we have to deal with what the caucus has decided. They've exercised their right to replace the leader. And the lessons of the last campaign, the lessons of Mr. O'Toole's leadership, as well as many, many other issues, will likely be discussed and debated by our leadership candidates.
All right,
I think from the party membership standpoint, what I'm hearing, whether you were a fan of Mr. O'Toole or not a fan of Mr. O'Toole, Conservatives want to come together. They want to be united. They want to get behind the next leader so that we can present that compelling national alternative that will appeal to more voters so that we can form government.
All right. Tell me about the leadership race. Give me a sense of urgency, of timeline. When's it going to start?
Very early stages. The way it works under the party's constitution is that National Council has the responsibility of appointing a leadership election organizing committee. In turn, that leadership election organizing committee will set the rules and procedures and oversee the election. My phone and my email and texts have been going off. There are a lot of Conservatives who want to sign up and help. That's a decision of National Council to make. We're going to spend a little time making sure that we have a fair process in terms of appointing that Leadership Election Organizing Committee, and then they will be charged with coming back with rules and procedure and a date for the leadership vote. Keeping in mind, we know from last year that Justin Trudeau will call an election in a pandemic if he thinks he can win. And so we don't want this to be needlessly long. We want to make sure that we get our new leader in place on a timely basis.
Okay, so let me ask you,
that's part of the balance that the Leadership Election Organizing Committee will be grappling with.
Right, and is everybody on the same page to the extent that you talked about, the precariousness of a minority parliament and so on? So is it fair to assume there will be a new leader of the party in place by the fall at the latest?
Again, I don't want to get ahead of the discussion with National Council. I don't want to get ahead of the work of the Leadership Election Organizing Committee. I also, and I've made this offer to our National Caucus Chair, Scott Reid, our interim leader, Candace Bergen. I also want to get the input of our members in Parliament and senators before we go too far down along the road. But certainly, my personal opinion, subject to all those things I just mentioned, is I certainly see the new leader of the Conservative Party being elected no later than the end of this year, and we're going to try to move it as quickly as we can.
Okay, let me ask you. Let me end on this. Time's running short here, but one change for this race will be the weight given to the ridings. This has been a disputed issue in the party for years. Each electoral district, no matter the number of members it had, used to be worth 100 points in a leadership vote. But the rule approved at the convention last year now gives each electoral district 100 points, or 1 point per vote, whichever is less. 2/3 of the Quebec ridings had fewer than 100 votes, so smaller ridings will have less weight in picking a leader. Could that discourage candidates from some parts of the country with less riding support from entering this race?
Well, I see it as an opportunity, and being an Atlantic Canadian, we don't have many that would have fallen under that threshold, but it's an opportunity for candidates to go out and sign up members and get more votes. So, I know our dedicated Quebec activists, they know, and they've known since that amendment was passed at the convention in 2021, that is going to be something that they will need to work on. And frankly, let's see how it unfolds. We haven't operated a leadership race under the new rules. That's how the Ontario PC Party has operated, and it seems to have gone successfully for them.
All right. Conservative Party President Rob Batherson. Good to talk to you, Mr. Batherson. Look forward to touching base as the race gets underway for weeks to come. So thanks for your time tonight.
Thanks, Peter.
All right, I want to bring in three guests now to talk about politics and protests. Muhammad Ali is a Liberal commentator, Andrew Brander is a Conservative commentator, and Nikki Hill is an NDP commentator. It's good to see you all. Thanks for being here. Andrew, if I can, let me start with you and Conservative leadership politics. It's been 24 hours now since the Conservative caucus voted out Erin O'Toole as party leader. Now the conversation's turning to what the Conservative Party actually wants to be and how a new leader can restore unity to a party of factions. So how can it be done?
Well, look, I think the selection of Candace Bergen as an interim leader is a huge step towards party unity, towards bringing the caucus together. Let's remember, Candace had a significant role in the leadership team under Andrew Scheer. She had a significant role under the leadership team of Erin O'Toole, which proves she's a bridge builder. She's someone that can work with sort of both sides of those two aspects of the party and be respected in that. Going forward, I think she's going to use her term, however long or short the Leadership Election Committee decides that to be, to work on a lot of the problems that were laid out in the Cummings report.
Right, but she's not running for the permanent leader. Somebody else is going to do that. What do they get if they win?
That's right. That's right. Well, hopefully, what we can't do as a party is waste the time between now and when the leadership happens. And what happened last time, you'll remember, is that Andrew Scheer stayed in place, And in large part, that was lost time. And this is the problem that Erin O'Toole inherited when he became leader, because there was such a short runway. He only had a year between the time he was elected leader. So we just need to make sure that that doesn't happen again. And that work can be done through an interim leader in the process.
Nikki Hill, let me turn to you. What are your thoughts on what's happened to Erin O'Toole here, what's going on inside the Conservative Party, and what it might mean for the country?
Yeah, I mean, I think this has been going on for months. I feel like towards the end of the election in the summer, that when Erin O'Toole spent a little bit less time on the campaign, we were all speculating as to where he went and to where some of his policy choices were taking the party. So I think, when you're leading a party, I think understanding what the value of that party is critical. So who's going to be stepping into a role in which that's unclear? I've been, watching and listening. We don't always get that snapshot into what's happening behind closed doors in parties, and we're certainly hearing a lot from Conservative MPs and insiders this past couple of days about the gamut of issues that could have led to Erin O'Toole's demise here, and they're ranging everywhere from guns and climate to conversion therapy, and it's hard to really, pin down what's going on in this party and where they need to be going next for Canadians to understand what they value.
Okay. Mohammed, look, we're talking about Conservatives now, but they've had back-to-back one-and-done leaders now, Erin O'Toole, gone after one election. But the Liberals had Stéphane Dion and Michael Ignatieff. They were also one-and-done. So what do you think Conservatives have to come to terms with as they get set to pick a new leader again?
I think they need to come to terms with what is the core policy areas that they want to continue to push forward, and how are they going to be appealing to urban voters, because they have been largely shut out across the country, and in fact started losing some in Alberta that they've long held. So they need to come together once again. I mean, from a Liberals' perspective, it's great. The chaos is great for the Liberal government because a disorganized opposition is helpful, and to be very blunt. And so they need to come together and show unity, but on some core fundamentals, not have everyone kind of go on their own and do their own thing and hold their own press conference without the leadership being aware of it. So, some leadership, some continuity and unity, I think that's a key thing that this party needs.
All right, we're going to have lots of time to revisit these issues over months to come when this leadership race gets underway. But Andrew, I want to shift the conversation out of these ongoing protests on Parliament Hill. Mohammed talked about chaos. Let's talk about chaos. These protests continues, and there is a connection perhaps. Some Conservatives have pointed to Erin O'Toole's flip-flopping on the meeting with protesters or not, may have been part of his undoing. Look, Conservative politicians have been supporting the truckers, taking their pictures with them. The Prime Minister has condemned them and refuses to meet with them or consider their demands. Jagmeet Singh's taken largely the same position. I guess what I'm wondering at this point is how this gets resolved, and what is the role here of our political leaders in trying to bring this to some kind of a conclusion?
Well, two things. One, I think the first rule of any government is that every Canadian, despite what opinions or views they may hold, should be entitled to have a government that listens to them. And the fact that the Liberals have refused to do that is certainly, Mohammed, my good friend, talks about unity. But you're not really seeing that as a value that's being espoused by this current government. The second thing I would say, we've seen a lot of, and I get the fact that a lot of people are frustrated right now. I feel terrible for everyone who lives in downtown Ottawa having to deal with that. Move to Toronto if you like; it's a better city.
Toronto's probably going to see the protest this weekend too. So,
and to be honest, I live at King and John, and there is a anti-vax protest that walks by every Saturday. So, all this to say, there is a place that the government needs to come to the table, needs to acknowledge, and not be dismissive and not inflame. And the concerns that I'm seeing from the NDP leader at Queen's Park, the municipal politicians in Ottawa calling these people is just not helpful.
All right, let me get your view, Nikki, in the context of, I mean, there's, they say they want to meet with the federal leaders, perhaps the Prime Minister, others, to try and have their demands met. But I guess a lot of people wonder, what's the value of a meeting if the other side says, look, the bottom line is you need to meet these demands and end all vaccine mandates, or you can't satisfy us?
Yeah, I mean, the organizers had a press conference earlier, I'm sure we all saw,
Yep.
and that was exactly the message, is they won't move until that is the case and mandates are ended. And I think, we are going to see rallies in Toronto this week. We certainly saw them here in BC last weekend, so that's continuing. I think there's a lot of threads here that we need to pull, and it's hard to just address the fact that, organizers standing up today and saying that what's core to them leaving Ottawa will be the end of mandates, which we all know jurisdiction-wise and in terms of what governments are actually, and the populace, which is high vaccination rates here in Canada, is willing to see governments adjust. So I think, in some threads that we're continue to pull as we look at this convoy, we do really need to address, and I think the Prime Minister and Jagmeet Singh and many others are being very clear that we are not going to tolerate hate as a country. But we also need to look at what is bringing people out across the country to talk about why they want mandates ended. And some of that is the challenges around affordability, concerns around the family. I'm not actually sure, after seeing behavior, a lot of these protesters in the past few days, and in terms of challenging people and safety without masks and going into homeless shelters and the risks that's happening, people will agree with that anymore.
Okay, Mohammed, let me finish on you here. What do you believe the obligation should be for the Prime Minister here? Lots of pressure on him to at least have a dialogue with these protesters, refusing to do that, the Prime Minister is. Why is that the right position?
Look, they put out a request for basically the government to be overthrown. They've asked for mandates to be ended across and restrictions, which are provincial and municipal. So they're also targeting the wrong person here. They should be going to Toronto. They should be going to Victoria. They should be going to Edmonton, where provincial governments have that jurisdiction. Now, the Prime Minister is not wrong when a number of these people, and I live here in Ottawa right now, they are selling Stars of David. They are pushing out anti-Semitic rhetoric. They're harassing men and women and children who are just walking around as innocently and going to homeless shelters. So to legitimize the behavior, the Prime Minister represents the entire country. It also has to understand when there are people that are choosing to break the law and be disruptive and aggressive with ordinary people. Like, there's protests that happen all the time in Ottawa. Right. And you don't have the mall, one of the biggest malls in the country, shut down for a week. You don't have stores feeling unsafe. You have schools being shut down. That's what's happening here. And a failure to acknowledge by some of these conservative MPs who choose immediately after Erin O'Toole is ousted to go take photos with some of these people is a clear example of the tone deafness from that party. All right, they wouldn't have gone out to talk to Indigenous protesters. So I think there needs to be an understanding that they have to work. They have to work with everybody, but they have to understand that, like, if you're going to choose this hateful rhetoric, this tone and treatment of others in this manner, you're not going to get a lot of sympathetic ears. I got
to jump in. I have to leave it at that. Time is short tonight, but I want to thank you all for joining me to talk about this. And protesters say they're not going anywhere, and we're likely to see them spread to different cities this weekend. So lots to watch for and to comment at another time. Thank you all for your time tonight. Appreciate it.
Be safe, Peter.
Thanks, Peter.
Thank you.
And that's all for this edition of Primetime Politics. I'm Peter Van Dusen. From all of us here at CPAC, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.